My name is Goro Fujita. I'm an art director at Oculus Story Studio. I have about more than a decade of experience in the entertainment industry, worked about 7.5 years at DreamWorks and now 2 years at Oculus Story Studio. I guess everything we do, we try to push the boundaries. We don't want to rest on old technology or current technology. We want to innovate, right? So I guess we try to remove any type of boundary, right? So I don't like to constrain myself early on, right? So basically we push for whatever we can and we see where we get. I think with any production, also in traditional film production, is that there are setbacks where you think something's going to work and it doesn't, but you don't find out until you try, right? So for us, the philosophy is always let's try it and see what happens. If we fail, we find a different way to do it, right? So obviously there is things like that, where maybe it's too processor heavy, so we have to find a workaround, right, to get around it. But that's I think not exclusively to VR, but with any production, it's the case. If you set yourself boundaries, then you will never know what's in the possible realm, right? So it's basically, you don't want to limit yourself ever too early. So what we usually do is just get the ideas out there, and we like to also do studio jams where we basically prototype only, right? So we do that annually, and that's something we really like to do, for example. But whenever we brainstorm about a new story, we don't want to set ourselves boundaries because we don't know what's possible or not, because it's all unknown territory. I think working in unknown territory is the most exciting part. Where can you do that these days, right? Film has been developed, theater has been developed. VR is something completely new, right? And that's what's the most exciting to me, because everything we do is new. And when I used to work for DreamWorks, you're in a working system, right? You're like a little part of a big production, and it's very clear what your job is, right? While if you work in an unknown territory, you have more responsibilities, different stuff you look into. And I think that's the most exciting part, because finding out what's possible is better than working in a system that's already figured out. So Quill is a tool we developed for our project called Dear Angelica. And I actually don't know the exact time frame, but I believe it was within a year, where we had something that we can already use, in terms of painting in VR. So when I work in VR, when I do my paintings in VR, I always ask myself, why VR, right? That's the key question, because you don't want to replicate something that's already exists, so you want to do something that is impossible to communicate on a 2D screen, impossible to communicate in the real world, right? So my goal is to do something like that. If you talk about my Worlds and Worlds piece, where there's worlds nested within other worlds, that is something you cannot do in real life. That is something you can sort of do on a 2D screen, but on a 2D screen you won't be able to be immersed. VR allows you to experience the environment, right? And for me, that was the key element when Quill introduced the infinite canvas. I wanted to take advantage of it, that you can zoom in infinitely, right? My first thought was, okay, what if there's this guy who holds an island in his hands, and the island is a detailed island where you can zoom into. And those are the two worlds I created first. And that also already answered the question, why VR? But I was okay, 2 levels are not enough, right? So I was what if the guy is in a park, and the park is in a snow globe that aliens are holding? And what if you zoom even further in, and the island that guy is holding is like a rabbit world, and within that rabbit world there's a bug world, right? So that was for me like the most exciting thing, that becomes possible, and not just on a 2D screen, but you can actually experience it, look around it, walk inside of it, you know, and that's something that was never possible in any medium before. So that's something that's like really exciting about this new technology. That's a good question, because when you do watercolor, for example, and you do watercolor every day, if you look at a tree, you start seeing and breaking it down in watercolor. And then you see that as a watercolor tree rather than the real tree. That doesn't quite happen to me with VR. What happens though is, what was interesting is I was once painting my own room in VR, and then I would want to look at the reference, like I would take off the goggles and look what my room looks like, but then I put it on and keep painting my room. But at some point I had so many reference points for my room in the virtual painting that I wanted to see what my door looks like over to the right side. And then I just look and expect to see the door, because I had too many reference points already in VR, so I felt like I was in my room, which is totally absurd, right? But that was a fun experience, and I was like kept laughing to myself because it happened multiple times. I'm like, where's the door? Oh, I have to look, and I paint the door, and then I look, oh, where's the table? You know, so that happens, you know, when you paint with a direct reference. So if I would paint this room right now, that would totally happen, you know, and stuff like, sometimes I get scared by my own paintings, which is really cool too. I was painting like a beach sequence, right? It was like a beach scenario, and then I painted like 400 feet up in the air. I was painting a hot air balloon. And I was painting inside the hot air balloon, and then I was going outside of it, because it's easy, you can just move outside of it, right? I stepped outside of it and I was painting the side of the balloon. And then I was like, looking down, and I'm like, you know, like I actually thought I would fall, right? And I broke out into laughter because it's ridiculous, because that's a world that I created. But it's interesting how it could like influence you in that way, right? And it happened multiple times actually that I got like scared, because I'm like, oh, I thought I was about to fall, because you really get the sense of depth, and that's interesting how you can fool your mind, and how you can actually trick yourself too. So if everything is individual, that's a question like how you want to work. It's up to you, right? You can, for example, you can paint a tree on a layer, duplicate the layer, merge the layer, so you have like 2 trees. You can merge this layer, duplicate it, then you have 4 trees. You can merge those layers, duplicate it, you have 8. So it's like exponential, right? So you can do this. I definitely do this for repetitive environments or something like that. If I want to do a forest, I'm not going to paint individual trees, because that takes too much time, right? And but that's the same in 2D. I think that's applicable in any medium that you can, like in Photoshop, for example, you can just make one tree and duplicate it. And the cool thing in VR though, if you design a tree in 3D, you can duplicate it and rotate it so the tree looks different, right? In Photoshop, you can't do that. You would duplicate it and change it by adding branches and stuff like that. So I love that about working or painting in VR, that you have so many new possibilities, because you can paint in 3 dimensions. All of a sudden it opens new doors, right? Where you can just duplicate a tree, rotate, merge it, duplicate the 2 trees, rotate, merge it, and then you have a variety of trees that all look different, even if it's the same tree, right? So it's really up to you. If I do like a character design within VR, obviously that's gonna be a single thing. But if I'm gonna do a tree with leaves on it, I can duplicate the leaves, you know. So there's no rule to that. Like you can just do whatever you want and whatever you need. So for me personally, it's really hard to go back to 2D environments. Like whenever I paint in 2D now, I feel like I'm handcuffed, right? It's interesting because when I painted in 2D before, I always already thought in volumes and in 3D. And I remember wanting to rotate my painting, but obviously that was a thing that was impossible, right? Now I can paint in VR, in 3D space, and now I can just rotate and create worlds. And I'm certainly not alone with that thought that that's amazing, right? So I hope that the art community will pick up tools like Quill and really develop like an art community. And I could see this to become big, like Photoshop, because it's just so rewarding to be able to be immersed in your own paintings, because that's different from being in a museum and looking at art. That's one thing, right? But being inside somebody's painting, that's like being in somebody's mind. And that's something that's truly special to the medium. And that's why I think VR is definitely here to stay, at least for art, you know. Maybe expensive for some students, but you need a powerful computer and VR equipment, right? Those are the two things you need, and you can just start painting. That's as simple as that, but it's definitely something you need to be able to afford, you know. But if you want to do it, the possibilities are out there.